And we are living in this multipolar world and this aperspectival madness world with the internet and the age of information as well. There's this massive information and the splintering of ideas and worldviews and perspectives, which I actually think might be what precipitates a future age of meaning, a future where meaning becomes all important, is when all these worldviews and all these splintering of ideas actually breaks the dam of our lack of coherence and our breaks the dam of our worldviews until we have to come to an integral perspective and we simply have to push forward into the integral new phase of understanding for mankind. Because the age of information that we're now in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, is changing our whole informational meaning landscape. And that is going to precipitate a huge change for the next 100 years.
Yeah. I think like ideas have grown so rampant. There's like a marketplace of ideas that are being shared, especially with social media nowadays. It's like the fracturing is almost absolute. It's like everyone has their own particular configuration of opinions and ideas that they subscribe to and believe in. And it's complete mayhem, right? It's complete chaos. And I think that this kind of fracturing happens before actually some kind of radical, lateral shift happens. It's not longer sort of in this continual progression of ideas that the answers are going to be found. It's actually in some kind of radical transformation where the whole game changes, that we're going to find the sort of ushering in of a new era, which you could call the age of meaning, right?
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Age of Meaning. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful day, wherever you are in the world. So today, in this episode, today in this podcast, we're going to be talking about a very significant question, which is, what is Age of Meaning? So we've started this podcast, Florian and I, and it's called the Age of Meaning. So also welcome, Florian. Thank you for being here today, my co-host.
Thanks so much. Excited to get into it.
Good to have you here as always. This is a podcast that is done exclusively by me and Florian at this point in time. In the future, we're going to have some guests, but the core of the podcast is this duo over here. So today's episode, we're going to be discussing what is the Age of Meaning. So what do we mean by this concept, and why did we call this channel Age of Meaning? And what is meaning? These are some of the questions that we're going to ask. We're going to ask the question, what is meaning? What does meaning mean? And why is it so important? And is there a lack of meaning in the world today? How does that show up, and what are some of the consequences of that? And how do we address this? How do we address the meaning crisis? So in our previous episode, one of our first episodes as well, we spoke about the meaning crisis, which is an academic term created by John Vervaeke. And that's basically a whole description, a gigantic academic description of this phenomenon in the world going on right now, a defining phenomena, which is called the meaning crisis, the crisis of meaning. And so partly we created this channel to solve the meaning crisis, to address the meaning crisis, and to create solutions for that. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about what meaning means, why it's so important, how we solve these problems, and how we solve the meaning crisis.
Well, I was just thinking that meaning is an interesting word, right? Because I think everybody kind of intuitively knows what meaning is, like what you're talking about when you talk about meaning, right? Because everybody knows some person that they care a lot about, or they might say to them, "You mean a lot to me." And I think our lives are drenched in meaning, right? That we experience has a certain meaning to us. So that's an interesting thing. Like, how can it be possible that there's a crisis of meaning? Like, meaning is always there, isn't it? Like, meaning is like, there's no way around meaning. Meaning is like this integral part of being a human being and having this subjective experience. And yet, with this term, the meaning crisis, it's also a very accurate description of where we find ourselves in the world today on a cultural level, which very much concerns this question of meaning, like the shared meaning, the meaning that we give to our world, which has to do with the fact, is like, what is the world that we inhabit, right? What is the world? Because the world is also not something that is just particular to us. Like, our experience, we have an experience of the world, but it's also fundamentally something that's shared, right? And so your experience of the world might be very different from my experience of the world. And we now live in a society, in a culture where the diversity, abounds, and there is I don't know, this is like a unique moment in history, almost, you could say, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how much diversity there is in how people actually experience the world and what people's worldview is. And I think that's something that we're gonna also get into.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where. So I'm very excited to. I've got a lot of thoughts for this, and that's exactly. I think that's a good place to start. What is meaning? What is meaning? Honestly, I was thinking the same thing. Like it's a weird word because everyone kind of knows what it means, like you say, but it's difficult to actually pinpoint what it means. Like meaning, it's just this
Hmm.
weird
Hmm.
word. But I think one of the one way of thinking about it, and you like you say, everyone does intuitively know that that word has a strong energetic signature to it. I feel like, and so yeah, one of the things that I could define it as is that meaning is coherence. It's coherence. So when something is coherent, because if you read words on a page, and you're looking at those letters, you're looking at text on a page, your mind understands what you're looking at, and the sentence on the page means something to you. It means that you're not just looking at random lines on a piece of paper. You're looking at something that has meaning, which means it's
Yeah.
coherent. It's symbolic of something. It's coherent. So there's some sort of coherence that comes from the world outside into you, and there's an alignment. And so it's a connection and an alignment. Meaning is about having an alignment between yourself and the universe. So you live in a coherent world. If there's a lack of meaning for the human animal, the human individual, it means that the world is not coherent. It doesn't make
Mm.
sense. There's something that is off about it. There's something that doesn't resonate between you, like in your heart and your mind, and how the world is and what you're doing with your life and what the society is doing with its orientation. So there's a lack of coherence and a lack of making sense and a lack of alignment. There's some sort of mistruth happening. There's some sort of something's off, like the society is not quite right, which is not that
Mm.
difficult to see and to feel that.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things to me is also that this sense of meaning, the feeling of meaning you get, it's like it's an immediate thing. It's like you observe something and that thing means something to you. It's not something. It's not like you ascribe meaning to it. It's not like you observe something and it doesn't have a meaning. It's like a neutral observation, and then you decide what that thing
Mm,
should mean or what you want it to mean, and then you ascribe that meaning to it, and then it comes back to you as meaning that thing. No, like you observe the meaning. The meaning is there.
mm,
It's like
mm,
it's immediate.
mm,
But at the same time, it's also not static, right? It's not
mm,
something that's also it's not universal, right? So your experience of one thing might be different from my experience. So it might mean one thing to you, and it might mean another thing to me. And then an interesting question is like, what is that determined? What determines the meaning of of the world around us? And I think there's a lot of things that go into that. And when you talk about coherence, I like to think about that also on a societal level, right? Like you kind of need coherence in the worldview that you share. It's not just the
mm,
coherence of what you're perceiving for yourself, but it's also the coherence
mm,
that
mm.
what I'm perceiving actually means something, well, sort of similar as it does to
Yes.
you. And it's at least it's not radically different, because then I
Mm.
don't know who you are, because I'm not, who you think I am, and you apparently aren't who I think you are. So then it becomes a very, confusing
Mm.
experience to share reality, right? If we can't even agree about like what's real or what it means.
And we are living in this multipolar world and this aperspectival madness world, which multi perspectives happening. This like with the internet and the age of information as well. There's this massive information and the splintering of ideas and worldviews and perspectives, which I actually think might be what precipitates a future age of meaning, a future where meaning becomes all important, is when all these worldviews and all these splintering of ideas actually breaks the dam of our lack of coherence and our breaks the dam of our worldviews until we have to come to an integral perspective and we simply have to push forward
Yeah.
into like an integral new phase of understanding for mankind because the age of information that we're now in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, 5 years is changing our whole informational meaning landscape. And that is going to precipitate a huge change for the next 100 years.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that sentiment. I think like ideas have grown so rampant in, like the marketplace of ideas. You could think about it like that. there's like a marketplace of ideas that are being shared, especially with social media nowadays. It's like the fracturing is almost absolute. It's like everyone has their own
Mm,
particular configuration of opinions and ideas that they subscribe to and believe in. And it's complete mayhem, right? It's complete chaos. And I think that this kind of fracturing happens before actually some kind of radical, lateral shift happens. It's not longer sort of in this, a continual progression of ideas that the answers are going to be found. It's actually in some kind of radical transformation where the whole game changes, that we're going to find the sort of ushering in of a new era, which you could call the age of meaning, right? Which
mm.
is going to be something that, like, from this perspective that we have now, it's almost unfathomable what it's gonna look like. But it's coming.
Right, it's coming. Yeah, it's coming. So I think, can I read this piece that I have here, because it's quite good at kind of capturing some of these points. Just for a little bit, a few of these paragraphs. So this
Yeah,
kind of
please.
touches on. What meaning is, kind of a contemplation on meaning, and the lack of meaning in society, and why we need meaning, and what the age of meaning is, what this vision is that we are building. Now, this is what meaning is. Okay, so imagine you're a human being, and you were just born. Okay, imagine you see the world with no meaning and no coherence. You have no idea what's happening. This is the default state. Normally, you make sense of the world via the inherited meaning structures of the people around you. You believe what you do about the world because other people have taught you that reality is as it is. So a baby is born and they don't know what's happening. They have no idea what anything is. And naturally, the human brain, the human psyche, forms a coherent model of reality and a meaning structure around it to understand everything, itself, others, the world, everything. And so the way that it works is that a baby inherits its meaning from other people, and it goes from a state of no coherence about anything at all, it doesn't understand anything, to then understanding things from inheriting it from its people around it. But what happens when that framework doesn't make sense anymore one day? What happens when the framework that you inherited is not satisfying and it's not true? Doesn't work out anymore. When you start to feel depressed, you start to feel confused, you feel lost about how to live your life. This is happening for many people. And you wish that this wasn't the way the world is, but it is. And there's nothing you can do about it. So this is a feeling of nihilism that is setting in for a lot of people around the world. This is a feeling of meaninglessness. And people don't know why they're here. And they believe that they never will know why they're here. So why are we here? Why are we here? What is our purpose? Who are we? What is this universe? A segment of the mankind psyche is going through this deep, deep nihilism at the moment and has been for a while. And there's a general pervasive meaninglessness that pervades the society in the background. So lack of meaning is when you don't fundamentally know why you are here. You have been trained by your culture to believe that this is normal. This is not normal. We used to have an answer for this. Why are we here? Deep down, you know that the whole biological model does not satisfy you in the deepest level. You know that you are more than atoms and molecules in your brain. Of course you are. You are you. But how do you make sense of this conscious living presence in the world, this material world with death and suffering and absurdity? Who are you to understand this universe? A mere primate ape. Well, what if the entire narrative is a construction and a poor, decrepit substitute for the real thing? The real thing, the real meaning, is not a construction. The real thing is derived from reality, from alignment and revealment and contact with truth. So we are at a point in human history right now where the spiritual reality of life can be understood in the grand scheme of human thought. Scientific thinking and the internet has changed the game of how we understand human thought. And the cutting edge of human thought lies in the integration of perennial wisdom, of universal insight, into the current modern and postmodern thought structures. Okay, so the cutting edge of human thought lies here in the integration of the perennial wisdom of universal insight into the current modern and postmodern thought structures. And meaning is the understanding of the human being in the universe once and for all. This is possible. Modern human dogma alone tells you this is not possible, but undertake your own investigation. So meaning is also orientation to how you live your life, and it's a compass to how to live, a standard, a set of universal principles grounded in truth, grounded in alignment between the human being and reality. Reality is not a strictly physical system, and it is high time that we disabuse ourselves of this farcical belief. This is a modern blip of grand delusion and error. It is a highly historically relative product of its time. It is a reaction to the corruption and ignorance of fundamentalist religion, and still it is deeply ignorant. Humanity as a whole needs to establish itself in the reality of the spirit, what has been called spirituality. And so why do we need meaning? Why do we need it? Well, we need it to be more happy and be more peaceful and more fulfilled. We have no moral guidance system anymore. Despite what the Richard Dawkins of the world will tell you, we need a moral spiritual guidance system. This needs to be ingrained in our institutions and our way of life. Now, the age of meaning is a concept for the future of mankind. It perceives the default state of the world, which is multi-perspectival, whether we like it or not. Age of Meaning focuses on the spiritual reality that is dawning for many people across the world, and helping to create an integrated understanding of the world's great religious, spiritual, and philosophical systems, and the framework of a qualified perennialism that allows for study of all thought as aspects aiding understanding, self-understanding of the human soul and mind. Gone are the days of sectarianism. Now we can see all thought as reflections of the universal mind through the collective consciousness of humanity. So this is a reimagining and re-understanding of who we are as a species and what defines us in our story. It is only in the last few generations that we in the West have decided to define ourselves in terms of biological terms only. Ultimately, we are beings that experience the world through our minds, through our subjectivity, through our thoughts, our ideas, our creativity. Always have been, always will be. We are not biological machines. We are beings of spirit. This is perhaps the biggest error of thinking in this era of history that has had innumerable consequences in all domains of life. And so this is why Age of Meaning focuses on issues of ontology, metaphysics, philosophy of mind. Not as speculative armchair philosophy, but as a way to correct the deep misunderstanding and misapprehensions of the facts of reality. It's astonishing that we have come so far into this dead end, although now we are beginning to transcend these errors and come to an integral solution. And so one of the things I was thinking is that in the future, the dam is going to break of all these new perspectives, all these confusing perspectives that are emerging, and the falling apart of the mainstream materialist paradigm and the old religious system. And so we are going to be forced into creating a new system of meaning and a new framework for understanding reality. Because the human being needs meaning and coherence. And so when there's a lack of meaning, a discoherence, or a negative meaning, then it's a fundamental problem, and it's a core problem of society and the individual. Okay, so I'll leave it there for now.
Nice. I love that. That's really great. I think that's really interesting.
Just
There's
some
a lot
thoughts.
that's
A lot, yeah.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
quite a lot.
It's casual thoughts. I mean, there's a lot that's packed into that.
Yeah. I can
Because
go into some
it's
other points as well, bridging that. But
yeah. Well, we can unpack it a little bit, right? Because it's doing a lot of things. Like one of the things it's doing, it's like laying out this timeline, right? Which I think that always helps me make sense of things. It helps me to make sense of where we are. It's like the development of our society, you know, like, or the developments of our culture. And with that comes the development of ideas. But it's more than just ideas. It's also the development of the ways of relating to the world around us. And I think this is where we often overlook some of the complexity of the history that we come from. Because you have to imagine that, you know, as the scientific revolution came along, the scientific enlightenment, that was a moment, it was a big turning point in history, right? Because before the scientific enlightenment really took foothold, which happened also like after the Protestant Reformation had already revolutionized basically faith in Europe, then the scientific enlightenment came along, and then the world started to really shift. The culture started to shift, where the way to make sense of reality, or the way to inform our relationship to reality, became based on a refinement of our ideas. And this refinement of our ideas, well, the way that we approached that was basically by engaging with the scientific method. And the scientific method is basically using our empirical observations the sense data that we get, using that to build a rigorous theory of like how things work, how things operate. As we did that, a new picture of reality started to emerge, which was based on those theories. And that picture of reality was basically based on ideas, right? It's an idea-based, relationship to reality that came along with that.
Mental constructs.
Mental constructs, exactly. Like rational constructs, from rational thinking, rational understanding, that we felt like we would get the best grip on reality, and grip on reality would also inform a relationship with reality that would be productive. And with that also came, the rise of basically, capitalism, right? And like exploiting the world around us as a resource, in order to grow, grow our economy, grow our society, have technological advancements. And there was a big allure to that. Like there's like an immediate appeal and an immediate reward for this conversion from like basically a religious worldview, which was about relating to God as part of like a moral universe, as part of a universe where there's a difference between right and wrong. It's part of a universe where there is like a hierarchy of order that you're a part of. To basically a universe where it's more about understanding the mechanics, and like and then as a living creature, being able to use that to your advantage, basically. And so that's a huge transition. And the other thing is that we basically went from what was more like an experiential and relational way of relating to reality as, somehow divine, somehow something that like you're partaking of a bigger story that's unfolding. There's a narrative, right? There's a narrative. There's a sense of right and wrong. So there's the normal, the normative, right? And then there's the nomological, which is their sense that there's an order that you are part of. So from that we went into this worldview where suddenly it's about mechanics and about how can we exploit that, how can we increase our understanding, which was based on ideas, right? So you went from participation in this one universe to more like this separation from this other universe where your ideas get more and more refined. And then from the Enlightenment point of view, it almost began to seem like that the other ones in the past who were still part of that religious paradigm, they just had the wrong ideas. Never mind the fact that they were completely experiencing reality in a different way. Now it just became about the fact that they had the wrong ideas. Their ideas are actually false, even though actually what they were doing was much more than just, believing in certain propositions or holding onto certain ideas, right? So now it became all about ideas. And then ever since then, we're still part in this culture. We're still part of this culture, which prioritizes the idea, right? Prioritizes rational understanding. And that means that basically with that came this attitude to life that like whoever has the best ideas, will come out on top. And it's like this competition between, it's almost like a Darwinian competition between ideas where the most true ideas will eventually win out. We keep refining our ideas. And so there's also this notion that science eventually will give us all the answers. That's called positivism, right? This idea that science eventually will discover all truths, give us all answers. We just keep refining and refining. But meanwhile, we stay in that mode where actually, we're just engaged with refining our ideas from basically a detached, so-called objective perspective, where we're not actually transforming our mode of being. Doesn't have anything to do with that. Who you are, what your mode of being is like it's irrelevant. That's maybe psychology, and you want to kind of be balanced and sane enough to be able to engage with a rational understanding of the world, right? You don't even want too much emotions or whatnot, or too much fluctuation. You just want stable sanity, basically. That's all. So forget about using your consciousness to evolve, right? Or to become something more than what you already are. And this is, I think, where there's the fundamental flaw, right? That now actually we're starting to find out that through this scientific approach to reality, where it's just about ideas, where we've already put all our chips down, we're starting to find out that there are actually inherent limitations to what science can actually give us. Because when it comes to understanding the fundamental nature of reality, when it comes to understanding the nature of our own mind, the nature of consciousness itself, we start to find that actually science cannot give us better ideas. It's incapable of giving us better ideas, of giving us better insight. It's like, no, the insight is the well of insight has run dry, right? It's like we got to stop digging down that well, because that's not necessarily going to give us the answers we need. Why? Because we're using the wrong tools, right? We're using the wrong tools to get to the source. And so I think now we're at this point where ideas proliferate and start to fracture, because we lost the coherence of the religious worldview that we once had, basically. And we're starting sort of trying to reconstruct another picture of coherence, which is based on science, but which becomes fundamentally biased and flawed, right? Because it comes to assume this physicalist ontology, where it assumes that the physical world as an external world that we're studying is the really real, and it's fundamentally made of matter, and that's what we're just trying to understand better and better. It's still trying to pursue that, right, which is a bias that it has. And meanwhile, actually, also that is starting to fracture, right? And so that's broad strokes of the history that we came out of, which is like, it's deeply, deeply significant to understand this history if you want to understand the moment that we find ourselves in, right? I don't know, maybe you want to comment on
For
that,
sure.
Andrew, before we go into more?
For sure, because that's the whole. It's so fascinating because that's the whole intellectual layer of this, and there's many people that are fascinated in the intellectual layer, and they're trying to understand reality, and they're into science, and they're into philosophy and spirituality, and how did we get here as an intellectual spirit of mankind, and it's fascinating how that plays into how that filters down, and it's an aspect of the fundamental sense of a lack of meaning in the people's lives on an everyday level. Because if you just think about it, like imagine a young teenage boy or a young man in his early 20s, and the average default guy, and he's kind of living this life. He's never told anything about like the truth of reality, because he's only told about this relative domain, and he's told about, well, the Big Bang Theory and the brain and stuff, and he's like, yeah, you're a monkey that evolved, and it's like this little like small like resolution, like kind of one layer of analysis of reality. There's no depth to it. It's completely flat, one dimensional. And in this picture of the universe as well, there's no space for the human psyche in the physicalist worldview. It's just kind of weirdly puzzled in there, like psychology is over here, and this weird psychological paradigm about mental health and treating it with drugs, and these like very, very stripped down and mechanistic views of the psyche that are kind of predominant in psychology. And in this whole worldview, there's no space for the spirit and the psyche and consciousness, because you're an animal, you're part of a system as well. You're a monkey, you're a biological being that has urges and desires and your libido and stuff and whatever, and and then the average person today is like scrolling on their phone all the time. There's no reason not to do that, because everyone around them does it. They eat junk food, they eat bad food that's ruining the purity of their consciousness. And there's no ethic. So there's no ethic in the world, because you can't derive an ethic or a way of living or a compass or a true north from the materialist paradigm. So young men today and young women everywhere, and everyone everywhere like that, there's a very much a strong center of gravity where people are just in this lowest common denominator state, where they're browsing on their phone, they're watching Netflix all the time, they're consuming low quality information, they're consuming low quality food. There's no real sense of consciousness and sense of duty and integrity and love and service. And why would you even serve anything? Because just be selfish and get what you want in your pleasure. So I feel like that also hits on a very strong sense of the meaninglessness of our world. And it is tied into these ideas because, like I said in the beginning, like as a baby, you inherit the worldview from your society. So in a sense, what we're doing now is talking about how did the worldview come about that you inherited? Like, even if you don't care about it on that level, you're not thinking about it on that level, you inherited the worldview. It's your ideas that we're talking about. It's everyone's ideas.
Yeah. Exactly. That's that's a very important thing to understand, that you become conditioned as a child, as a baby. You become conditioned into this worldview, into this, the world starts to have a certain meaning for you because you're conditioned in a certain way by the other actors in your environment, by your parents, by the school system, etc. And actually the meaning system that you inherited is kind of rotten, right? Or it's like it's or it's empty, like there's no. And the problem with that is that the meaning or the worldview is supposed to provide you with an orientation in life. That's the thing. It should help you orient yourself in life. It should help you understand what is the right way to live. What is there possible for me to become? Oh, what can I grow towards? What potential is there within me, right? To discover and to actualize. And like that notion, there's barely any of that in the sort of in the pedagogy, in the way that we're raising our children, in the way that that our culture brings us up. There's barely any of that. There's no deeper meaning. It's like, yeah, what's the point of it all? You know, why should I go on living? It's like the moment that suffering hits you, it's like it's all good and fine and fun and games when you're just pursuing your instant gratification and you get your sense pleasures. But then as soon as you start to suffer, it's like suddenly it becomes almost unbearable. It's like, why go on living? You know, it's like, why should we put up with it? What's the point? Is there any purpose, right? What is the purpose? Because that's the idea that people, if you would quiz them on it, it's like, well, a lot of people, secular people, believe like, well, basically there is no meaning. It's like we're just here because we just evolved somehow
random.
to be this. We're just animals with a lot of intelligence, and that's it. And alive.
It's so profoundly like minimizing of the human experience. It's like we're just random. It's just a random coincidence by fluke. And then the whole massive, the magic, the significance of like, well, there's only like a 1 million billionth percent chance, whatever, that we even exist at all ever. Like that should be like an astonishing or inspiring fact. But in the secular materialist paradigm, it's like, wow, you know, it doesn't matter. We just random. Like you just minimize it. Everything's reduced to this nothingness. It's like
it fundamentally doesn't matter in that view, right? Which is so disheartening, right? That's the problem with that. It's like, the effect that that has on our lives is actually very destructive. And so if there's a chance that it's actually false, it's very much worthwhile to investigate that, right? Because then there might be something to salvage, right? And there might be a better alternative for us. And I think for me, this is the big thing that, as I just laid out, sort of where we went from participation in a religious world, basically, to this more separate relationship to a world where we just refine our ideas. I think now we're at a point where it's no longer about, like, how do we update our ideas? It's like we need an even yet better idea about the nature of reality or something like that. I think it's fundamentally we're in need of a much deeper shift, actually, which is almost it's hard to even fathom. Like when you're in this sort of scientific paradigm, you kind of take for granted that this is the way. That's the way to go. That's the way to understand reality. That's the way to understand ourselves, and that's the bandwagon we're on, so to speak. But I think the important point here is that actually what we need is a lateral move. We need to realize that actually science is epistemically limited in what it can actually give us. Right? So when it comes to answering the question, like, what is the fundamental nature of reality? What is the fundamental nature of our mind, of our own subjectivity? Then I think what we need is not just an update in our ideas, but we need to update our mode of knowing. You can call it an epistemic shift. It's about how do we come to know, actually. And then science is one thing, right? There's empirical sense observation, and that's very valuable. I don't want to discard the relevance of that, but it's also not exclusive. It's not exhaustive of the approaches that we can take to reality. So we need this epistemic shift where it's about exploring a different mode of actually coming to knowledge, coming to insight. And that's where we realize that actually, what is now becoming clear, that maybe when we abandoned religion, right, when we abandoned spirituality, in favor of a secular scientific worldview, we threw out the baby with the bathwater, right? And maybe there's something to salvage there in terms of a mode of access to reality that can be utterly transformative of your experience in life, right? And I think this is where we should look if we want to find the answers to some of these fundamental questions. We should start to look at our own consciousness as a pathway to come to true insight and true understanding. And this is revolutionary, right? Because within the scientific paradigm, that would be foolish, right? Or it would not be that's basically not legitimate. That's not what you do. By definition, you kind of exclude your subjectivity. You try to be objective and just study the facts, right? So by definition, you've thrown that out. Well, it might have been actually a very essential thing that we need to salvage, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my feeling. And then what you get is like, well, then you open up the playing field to different forms of epistemology. And it's not one or the other. That's the thing. It's not like either spirituality or science. Because nowadays you have a lot of people who are religious or spiritual who kind of neglect science or feel like, science is not the way. But of course, science has a lot of utility and science is very important.
Mm-hmm.
But science then, flies in the face of certain religious dogmas, right? Or the exoteric forms of religious dogma. And then it's not to be found there either, right? It's neither of these extremes, but it's actually in broadening the playing field and understanding that there's different modes of accessing reality that are equally valid and can give other forms of understanding. And that's where it becomes integral, right? That's where you engage with different modes where they are appropriate, right? And you understand that, like, physical reality, as we can study it with science, gives us a lot of useful information, but it's also just looking at it through one lens, and reality can also show a different face, which is not physical at all, and it's still real, right? So how do we access that? Well, maybe by going back to, some of the ancient wisdom traditions and the techniques that they used, to evolve your consciousness, to evolve your own spirit as a mode of access to reality. And that's a radical shift, right? Which to me, that will usher in the age of meaning, right? That's my view on that.
Very, very brilliantly put. Very clearly explained those many things. And that leads me into a lot of thoughts. I think also the one thing is that so we have this need, this tension, this need that you articulate to have a new ways of understanding, not just a new worldview, new ways of understanding, epistemic shifts into different ways of being, different ways of understanding the universe, so that we can understand and engage with reality more truly in ourselves, and as a collective can come to truth and in alignment, and also so that we can orient ourselves. So I think that's like almost there's two big pillars here to Age of Meaning. The one is the worldview, and the second one is the orientation to life. And the two are complementary because the orientation to life ought to be derived from the worldview, from the truth, from the alignment with truth and reality, the way that reality is. And the coherence between yourself and the universe, and yourself and other, understanding between yourself and the universe, and where you fit into the broader scheme of existence. That's how you derive your orientation. That's where you find your compass and you find your North Star, and you begin to understand the moral dimensions and the aesthetic dimensions of philosophical and spiritual thought. And you have a way of living in this world which is aligned with the reality. So there's the worldview element and the alignment. I think especially, it's like you're saying with the ideas, like especially the orientation element is a huge thing that our society is missing. It's massive. And there's an issue where, to a secular person, it seems like morality is like this nerdy thing, or this like childish thing, like, oh, you got to be a good person so that God doesn't punish you or something. It's got this whole misapprehension from the old fundamentalist religious days. But living integrally and living aligned with your truth and with reality, and living in alignment with the principles of reality, like living so that you are not just serving your ego, so that your evolution, your soul is evolving. You're trying to live holistically. You're trying to understand things holistically and become whole holistically, like the unity of the universe. The universe is fundamental unity. The universe contains love, the unity of opposites. You should then embody love, and you should embody unity and wholeness. These kinds of things have a deep resonance because they are reflections of the actual reality, the state of reality. So I think that's one thing. Now, another thing that leads me to as well, which you said about kind of the integral element of things. So I wrote down a list of features that I really think encapsulate what we're doing with Age of Meaning. And actually, before I get to that, there's one more thing. In terms of the worldview, because we've got this tension, we've got this breaking down, we've got this need for a shift. What we're going to do with Age of Meaning is build a new worldview. Like, that's also part of this. We are constructing a new paradigm. We're constructing the future paradigm of mankind. We're constructing a coherent model of the universe that integrates multiple perspectives together so that we can have a future-proof a futuristic worldview, philosophy system that is coherent, that makes sense, that's transparent, that's integral, that contains many things. It integrates many different perspectives. So we are going to build this model and share our shared framework, which me and Florian already have. We've already established this. And we're going to keep building this model with Age of Meaning, this framework and way of understanding reality, this new worldview, new paradigm that's integral. And part of what that is, part of what we're doing here is by bridging a gap. So we're bridging the gap between the spiritual reality and the truth of reality and the mystical dimensions and the parts of reality that science hasn't integrated. We're bridging a gap between the spiritual and the mundane world, the spiritual and the scientific world. And so we're bringing that in through language and through logical frameworks and systems and articulation. So we're articulating those parts of life, the parts of life that have been excluded and rejected by the modern paradigms. And we're going to build a bridge between those worlds with our ideas and with our articulations and our study of the world's religions. And so I think this one idea, this one concept that I really like and resonates with this project is the idea of bridging a gap, building bridges, okay? Because now I have a list of bridges that we're going to be building together. We're going to be building lots of bridges, okay? So the one bridge is the bridge between philosophy and spirituality. A lot of the time, spirituality is missing the philosophical element, and the philosophy element is missing the spiritual element. We're going to be bridging the gap between science and philosophy, the epistemology that's missing in science. We're going to be building a bridge between science and spirituality, of course. And we're going to be building a bridge between the left brain and the right brain. Building a bridge, the left and right hemispheres. So we're going to touch on this in a future episode.
Another one is we're building a bridge between the East and the West.
Exactly. You know? Yes, exactly. Perfect. East and West, ancient wisdom of the East and the West. And so on the left and right hemisphere of the brain as well, most people, I don't think, know the significance of that. If you study Ian McGilchrist's work, his book, The Master and his emissary, you'll see the deep, profound significance of the difference between left brain thinking and right brain thinking, and how our culture is addicted and lost in left brain thinking. And we're missing the right brain, which is actually the more intelligent, holistic part of the brain. And so bridging the gap between that. Then we're going to be bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge, ancient wisdom and science, the perennial wisdom and science, bridging the gap between the ancient spiritual philosophical traditions and the modern intellect and the modern scientific cutting edge thinking, bridging the gap between the spiritual and the material as well, embodied spirituality, embodied knowledge. Yeah, so those are some of the bridges we're going to be building with this channel.
Fantastic. I can't wait. They should give us like a metaphysical engineering degree.
Metaphysical bridge
from
builders.
All the bridges were.
Isn't your dad a bridge builder in the physical world?
Yes, but he builds like actual bridges. Yeah. Actual useful bridges that people can drive over.
These are going to be useful in the astral realms, in the psyche of mankind.
Right.
And your surname, right? Nivendijk means like a new dike.
New dike, yeah.
Bridges are built around that. It's like a structural thing.
Yeah. Well, just like we have physical infrastructure, we also need metaphysical infrastructure.
Yes, exactly.
So we can move about from one to the other, like
exactly.
from one domain to the other. We need that.
We're basically engineers.
So that's very apt. We are basically engineers.
Thought engineers. Constructing a whole
But
system.
I want to make an important footnote here.
Yes.
I want to make an important footnote. And this ties into what we were saying before. It's like, this is what I was just thinking this, so tell me what you think about this. But I want to assert it because I believe in it, right? So I think, meaning fundamentally is not of our own making. And this is actually where the problem emerges, that, both in religious dogma as well as in scientific dogma, it's actually the ego who comes up with a misconception of reality because it believes that it can decide what reality is actually structured like. And what it does is the ego creates an abomination, which is, this whole image of reality and structure and like its intricate system. It's like, and then it believes that like, yes, this is reflective of true reality. It's foolish, right? It's never true. Even though if there may be an inkling of truth there, right? There may be a seed of truth, a kernel of truth. It's an abomination because it's created by the ego, because real meaning is not of our own making. Real meaning actually emerges. It's emergent when the ego can actually humble itself, right? And the mind can actually give way to the wisdom of the heart to emerge. And that's not something you create, right? It's something you receive. It's something you experience, which is
Mm.
the problem with ideas. When you hold on too much to ideas,
Mm.
especially when it's like one set of ideas and it becomes ideology, whether that's religious or scientific, doesn't matter. Is if it's ideology, it's the ego deciding that it can figure out the way that things really work, and then everybody else, if only everybody else would believe it, right? Then we would figure things out.
Mm.
It's fundamentally flawed. It's a fundamentally flawed notion. So that's why I think also our project in Age of Meaning is not going to be dogmatic and is not going to be ideological, right? What we're doing is actually we're trying to transcend ideologies by connecting these different frameworks and seeing how they can cross fertilize each other, right?
Mm.
And just contribute to an understanding in life and an orientation in life, which fundamentally, at the end of the day, right, at the bottom line, it has to be embodied. And in embodiment, it's also about like what is the inherent, wisdom of your the fibers of your being, what do they give to you, how do they lead you, what is the guidance of your higher self, right? What is the wisdom of your heart, like how can you actually humble yourself and be guided or be led, right, instead
Mm.
of feeling like you're supposed to be on top and figure it all
Mm.
out. So that's just something I wanted to
I
add.
think it's
I
interesting
don't know.
because there's kind of like an existential meaning that can emerge, like a really deep sense of meaning, which is like in the heart, in the heart space, in deeper parts
Mm-hmm.
of you, like you say, the fabric of your being, the fabric of your structure of your consciousness and your soul, where it starts to become a relation with reality. And then it's not just, I think you can have like a maybe like a lowercase m meaning, where it's like, okay, you can have a coherent image of the world which gives you a sense of meaning, like, okay, this is my purpose, I'm doing this and that, and that's nice, that's good, that's important. But then you can have like a deeper capital M meaning, a transcendental meaning almost, where it's like a deep, actual, intuitive, almost mystical relationship with reality that unfolds.
Yeah.
And it's not your ego. It's not your ego. And so the shift from the ego, from the mind space and the thinking in the ego, into the heart space, into the spiritual
Yeah.
senses, or even into the third eye, where it's, in the chakra system, into the spiritual senses, where you are actually
Mhm.
opening yourself as a channel, like you're open, like you're a human being with sense organs. We are completely blind and deaf to our sense organs ordinarily, like our actual
Yeah.
senses. And so that's when this deeper thing emerges, where that now it becomes a spiritual meeting and a spiritual purpose unfolding in you. Like it's literally
Right,
the
right,
purpose
right.
unfolding, which you're relating to.
Exactly, exactly. And then it's also interesting that you can, because you're conditioned, right, by the environment that you grow up in. But despite of all of your conditioning, you can imagine like this, that actually, despite that conditioning, which forms you as a cultural agent, there's still some part of you that's actually transcendent, that's not of this world, right? And you could think about that as your soul, right? And then you could actually use that concept of the soul and use that as a means to come to a different orientation in life, where you realize, like, I'm going to try and get in tune with that. I'm going to try and get in tune with my soul and see where my soul wants to lead me. It's like not what comes out of my worldly personality, not what comes out of my ego desires. No, what does my soul want? And it's something so subtle, and it's something that seems almost like it's not fully there. But if you can tune into that, I promise you, you will experience a transformation in your life, right? And things will come to you that you know to be true, that you can then use as guidance in your life, in your path, right? And it doesn't matter. It's like this question of like, well, do we have a soul or not? Like, is the soul real or not? That the whole question is irrelevant if you just take the soul as actually as an instrument, that concept, you use that concept as an instrument or a tool to get into a different existential mode of being. And that is what matters. That is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter if the idea is true or not. All ideas are untrue in some way, right? Because the world isn't made of that, right? Of that which we can capture in our concepts. But your being is like, that's part of what's the most real for you, right? So if you can use concepts to transform your beings in a productive way, then you're on the right track, right?
Hmm.
And that's where a concept like the soul is fundamentally useful, and it's not to be discarded lightly, right? I would say.
I think, yeah. And how would that play out on a collective level? I think if we look collectively, if we shift to the collective lens now, I mean, there's also this need for a holistic understanding of reality to come about in mankind, for a integral holistic worldview that accurately reflects reality and places us in a way where we understand who we are. We understand more deeply our relationship to the mystery. We understand who we are and why we're here. Because, and this is the thing, this is like one of the huge points, is that people think that that's not possible. That's a dogma, though, you know. People believe in the secular paradigm that it's not possible to understand why we are here, or what the purpose of the universe is, or what the purpose of your life is. But this is basically a presupposition and a consequence of the materialist paradigm. It's like begging the question, like, of course you think that it's impossible to know why you are existing, because you believe that you're basically a monkey, and you've already determined yourself to be an ape who has nothing floating in empty space. But what if you're actually consciousness, an expression of the universal consciousness, which is the whole creator of the universe, and you're it? And then you can, from that framework, maybe come to understand your purpose. So that's how it works. And so on a collective level, I think that's one element, creating some sort of worldview that's more rooted and more grounded and more where we're fit, we're holistic, we understand ourselves. And we understand the mysteries a little bit more integrally. And then also along with that, we have the moral dimension, the orientation to life, and also the raising of consciousness. So what you just described about the soul becoming guided by your soul and tuning into the subtleties of the soul instead of the ego. You know, if everyone did that, and if everyone started to purify their minds and purify their bodies with their lifestyle, with the food that they eat, with their habits, with their consumption on all levels, and started to purify their minds and bodies, then the soul can come out more, because we're not corrupting it all the time with all these social addictions and indulgences and corruptions of the body and the mind. And so then we could raise the literal state of consciousness of mankind and create a much more beautiful world, and eventually a utopia on Earth, perhaps. One day, maybe 500 years, let's say. But we're getting there.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. It's a lofty aim anyway, right?
Gotta have the vision, though. It's good to have a vision.
Yes, you need to have the vision. And one thing I would add is that a worldview is functional, right? It's functional. It's not necessarily veridical. It's not about, does your worldview represent some kind of objective state of affairs? No, it's like, how does your worldview inform your orientation in life? That's what matters. Worldview is functional, which means that a secular, neo-Darwinian, physicalist worldview is functionally rotten. That's the thing. Never mind if it's veridically true or not. It's functionally rotten, right? That's why it's in need of replacement. It doesn't matter if it's veridically true or not. It's not the point, right? Because primarily,
it does matter.
A worldview is functional.
I
it does matter, but
agree.
it's not. That's not where the discussion should be. That's not shouldn't be the focus point of the discussion, right? And that's the other thing, that it's even veridically wrong, right?
Yeah.
But I would say primarily it's functionally wrong.
So that's a huge. I agree. The functional point is massive. Massive. How it affects the human being, what it affects the psyche. It's almost abusive to the human being. This model, this Darwinian, secular materialist. It's almost an abusive relationship of the human being and the world. It's like you're you know, it reduces the human being, like it reduces consciousness, love, and the spirit and creativity and everything. The whole humanity, it just reduces it to nothing, and we have to then clutch at straws to even define ourselves anymore in a positive way. But I would say also that the thing about reality, like the amazing thing about the way that reality is structured, is that the true is always aligned with the good and the beautiful. There's an alignment with the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so the truth of reality, the actual truth of reality, what we need is to align ourselves, our worldview was aligned with the truth. And when we align with the truth, then the love and the beauty comes with that. And then the whole thing becomes whole all the way down. So
Yeah.
But I agree though that the functional, just the
Yeah,
evidence
because to
of it,
me it's like that's the thing with truth is like, to me truth is not in a
not in a
proposition, right? Truth is
propositional
not in
way.
a
Yeah.
statement.
Right.
Truth is a state of being, right? Truth is a state of being, and a worldview can be part of a state of being, and it's part of this ecosystem that forms the state of being.
Mm.
And the worldview can become a factor in that ecosystem that actually disturbs the state of being,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
then the worldview is just not aligned, so it's not true. It's not part of this coherent,
Right.
truthful state of
It's
being.
not reflecting
And I
the
think,
state of things. Like truth is like the way reality is as
mhm.
well. Like there's a way that reality is. Like it exists. Like does the worldview reflect that? Is it transparent to that, or is it some other little ego creation sitting in like in the wrong place? Like, or does it
Yeah, I think
reflect?
truth, truth is, in a way, it's a funny concept, because to me, I've grown to now see that this idea of truth is not about, like, because a very ugly state of being, you could say, or a very disharmonious state of being can be true, can just as much be true, in the sense that
True.
it can exist. It can
Right.
exist, and then it's like, you could say it's true
Right.
because it's true as an existent reality. But I would say that truth as a state of being is actually is not anything like that. And so actually that, as an example of a state of being, I would say is very untrue. A state of being which is incoherent and disorganized and disharmonious is
Mm.
not true,
Mm.
even though it might be real, right? I would say the truth is actually the state of being of full alignment.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's something that's attainable for us,
Yeah.
right? And that's something we should strive towards,
Yeah.
right? In our consciousness, as
Mm.
a conscious being, it's like you want to strive for truth, right?
I think.
As a mode of
Yeah.
being, which is,
Yeah, I think that gets into the like deep philosophical questions. Like also like it comes up for me like the thing of relative and absolute, and maybe like the absolute is always absolute truth, and then there's like relative degrees of that truth in the world of relativity and things like that. But yeah, that's a big question, and I definitely think with the alignment with the truth and the good and the beautiful, like you already see that as such a big difference because in the material paradigm and even in the Christian, even in the old theological paradigm, like the sense of truth and groundedness doesn't come through enough in the kind of husk of religion that we're left with. This sense of why be a good person, why evolve yourself, why align yourself with truth, like why, like that's what
Yeah,
we need to bring that sense into the world. Why do it? Why do it? What's the reward? What's the point? Like, what do you gain from awakening yourself to more and more levels of truth and love and holding more
yeah,
love and more beauty? And that's like what we're missing. Mankind is missing that.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's truth has this double meaning in a way, where truth becomes both about sort of what is propositionally true or not, what is veridical, as sort of representative of some kind of objective state of affairs, and true as in the sense like someone has a true character,
Right.
or like someone is true, they're true to their partner, right? So there's something else about the truth
Mm,
there that
mm,
is like says something about an embodied state of
right.
being,
Yes.
right? And then I think even when you say like alignment with the truth,
Mm,
it's almost like then still you make the truth that's something external. But I think when alignment happens, alignment is the truth,
mm,
right? Alignment is the truth, right? There's not alignment to the truth, right? It's an immediacy of
yes.
identity there. But that's a confusing thing about the concept truth in a way.
It's a big one. It's like the concept of meaning. I think it's more complicated than
Mm-hmm.
meaning even. But yeah. Yeah. So age of meaning. So I think let's see how long we've done. We've done an hour and 13 minutes.
About an hour.
About an
Yeah.
hour and
30 minute, like, yeah.
Any concluding remarks? So what are we doing here? We're building a worldview as well. Like what do you feel about that? Like we are constructing a paradigm, a worldview, a
Yeah.
coherent way of thinking about the world that we can offer people that are watching along with us are going to imbibe in our worldview, and they're going to get this holistic, integral understanding of the world that doesn't exist anywhere else. It doesn't exist in this kind of way, in this unique way. And integrating of East and West and science and philosophy and spirituality and philosophy
Yeah.
and spirituality.
Yeah, it's like a survival kit, you know.
Mm,
We're just putting together a survival kit for the contemporary age, you know,
hmm
like for the meaning crisis, where it's both
Exactly.
about a worldview, but it's also about, you know, what techniques can you use, right? What
Mm,
I don't know, what practices can you engage in? Like what are some of the things that are shown to be effective?
mm,
How do we navigate the terrain? It's not just
mm.
about the map, right? It's
Yes.
also about the tools. So
Skills,
it's broader than
how
just
to
a
level up
worldview.
your skills as well in this world. Your skills as a
Right.
conscious
Yeah,
agent, as a
yeah,
spiritual being.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a survival guide for the meaning crisis.
Yeah, so make sure that you're gonna want to subscribe, you know, because this is gonna come in handy one day.
This
You never
is
know when shit hits the fan, and you're gonna have to, you know, like
yeah.
really get down to it.
This is gonna come massively in handy because you're gonna also bypass years of confusion and epistemic fumbling around as a newbie in the game of philosophy and spirituality, because we have been building this for a decade and even 3 years together. So it's a very coherent, crystallized, beautiful, non-ideological, beautiful, integral worldview that we're going to create into this world through these podcasts and all other forms of media. So,
And
amen. It is so. Okay, so thank you for joining us today on this beautiful day, wherever you are in the world. So yeah, tune in for many, many more episodes, and remember to like and comment down below. Please tell us what you think about everything that we said in this episode, and subscribe for the Age of Meaning. So thank you for joining us today.